The woman runs barefoot across the wet earth, her lungs burning as the shouts close in behind her. This is not a scene from a saga. This is the raw, human terror that defined the Viking Age for tens of thousands. In the year 845, on the banks of the Seine, the air thick with the smell of burning thatch and panic, one woman's flight captures a hidden truth. The Vikings, with their dragon ships and gleaming axes, were not just after silver or land, they were hunting for people. And they knew that to truly break an enemy, you didn't just steal their treasure, you took their women. This was a calculated strategy, a form of psychological warfare woven into the very fabric of their raids. The monks of Saint-Denis, recording the sack of Paris by the half-legendary Ragnar Lothbrok, wrote of the slaughter and the ransom demanded by the Norsemen. But they also noted, almost as an afterthought, a quiet, chilling detail. Some of the captured wives and daughters were never returned. Imagine that moment of realization. A community might gather ransom to save their men, their lords, their holy relics. But for the women seized by the raiders, no price could be paid. They were simply gone. Why were women the primary target? To the Viking mind, a woman represented far more than a potential slave or concubine. She was the living heart of a community, the vessel of its cultural continuity and honor. By taking her, by harming her, a raider could inflict a wound that would never fully heal, a shame that would paralyze a village for generations. This was domination that went deeper than the sword. It was an attack on the enemy's very future. The chronicles from across Europe echo this same refrain, a grim chorus of grief. From the Anglo-Saxon monasteries of England to the Frankish fortresses of Francia, the story was always the same. The Annals of Fulda, for the year 881, record with stark simplicity that women were dragged to ships like cattle. Dudo of Saint-Quentin, writing in the 10th century, muttered of Viking wickedness upon the matrons of ruin. The language is often veiled, speaking of women being dishonored or carried away, but the meaning is brutally clear. Their bodies became the battlefield where wars were truly won. So, as that one woman stumbles on the riverbank, her dress torn, hands gripping her wrists, her personal nightmare is just beginning. But it is also part of a much larger, more terrifying system. She does not know that her fate is part of a cold, economic calculus. She feels only the immediate terror, the fire, the loss. Yet for the Vikings chasing her, she is already a commodity, a piece of a thriving trade that would stretch from the green hills of Ireland to the bustling markets of Baghdad. Her capture was not an accident of war, it was the point of it. And as the heavy chains closed around her wrists, she became one single, heartbreaking data point in a vast catalogue of human suffering that history tried, but ultimately failed, to forget. If the screams of the captured women faded across the water, the evidence of their fate was etched into parchment and soil. The horror was so profound that it forced its way into the written record, not through the voices of the Vikings themselves, but through the trembling hands of those who witnessed it. Monks, those meticulous chroniclers of the early medieval world, dipped their quills in ink and trauma. They wrote of nuns ravished at Lindisfarne, of wives carried away from ruined Frankish villages, and in the Annals of Ulster, a stark entry for the year 821 simply states that the Vikings took women by violence, leaving the land grieving with lust. These were not exaggerations. They were desperate attempts to document a cataclysm, but the Vikings were men of action, not of letters. Their testimony lies not in words, but in objects. Archaeology becomes the prosecutor in this case against time. In trading hubs like Hedeby and Birka, archaeologists have unearthed cold, hard iron, shackles and collars. But here is the chilling detail: many were sized specifically for women and children. In places like Pernod, Sweden, these iron collars have been found, their locks still clicking shut with a heavy, final sound when demonstrated by historians today. That click is the sound of a life being reduced to property. This was not the chaos of war. This was the calm, calculated infrastructure of a slave economy. The story becomes even more undeniable when we turn to genetics. DNA studies of skeletal remains in Viking Age graves in places like Dublin, York, and the Orkney Islands reveal a sudden and dramatic influx of Scandinavian genetic markers. But the story is in the specifics. While the male lineage often shows a mix of local and Norse DNA, the female mitochondrial DNA, passed directly from mother to child, is overwhelmingly from the British Isles and Ireland. This genetic fingerprint paints a clear and brutal picture. Norse men were arriving and taking local women on a massive scale. They were the founding mothers of entire Norse communities abroad, but not by choice. The sagas, written centuries later, sometimes gloss over this brutality, but they cannot hide it completely. The Laxdala saga tells of Melkorka, a purchased slave who is later revealed to be an Irish princess. In a moment of breathtaking defiance, she pretends to be mute for years, refusing to grant her captor even the sound of her voice. This fictional echo points to a vast, silent reality. Behind every set of shackles, every foreign gene, and every terse chronicle entry was a person, a woman with a name, a home, and a story she was determined to preserve, even in the face of erasure. The evidence was mounting, a case built on whispers from the dust, proving that the terror of the raid was only the beginning of a long, cold journey into the heart of a system that treated human lives as cargo. The moment the chains closed was not an end, but a beginning, the start of a new life etched in relentless labor and silent despair. For the women dragged onto those longships, the piercing terror of the raid slowly gave way to the dull, grinding horror of existence as thralls. Their value was measured in their utility. They were forced to become the engines of the Norse world, tasked with the backbreaking work that fueled expansion. They cooked, they cleaned, they tended crops and animals. In places like Dublin, archaeologists find their presence in the countless weaving tools and loom weights, evidence that they were the hands spinning the wool and weaving the textiles that became a cornerstone of the Viking economy. But their bodies were not just for labor, they were also territory to be claimed. Forced concubinage was a brutal fact of life. A chieftain's status was often displayed by the number of women he controlled. The sagas, from the male perspective, sometimes recall these unions almost fondly, as stories of conquest. Yet behind those tales lies the unspoken reality of coercion. Imagine the silence in the chieftain's tent after the screams subsided. A young woman, once a wife or daughter in a Frankish village, now sits on straw, her dress torn. She is alive, but the weapon used against her is memory. She has been made to feel impure in the eyes of her own kin, her honor shattered to break the spirit of her community. This psychological warfare was as deliberate as the blow of an axe. The Vikings understood that by harming the women, they wounded the cultural soul of their enemies. The chronicler's use of terms like dishonored was not just about morality. It was a recognition that these women were often rendered unable to return. Their very presence a reminder of the community's failure to protect them. Their wombs were turned into battlefields, ensuring the next generation would bear the bloodline of the conqueror. The children born of such unions, like the future King Olaf Tryggvason, whose mother was a purchased slave, would be celebrated in Norse lore, their origins obscured by later glory. The physical toll of this existence is written in bone. A burial in Orkney reveals a young woman, her DNA tracing back to Ireland. She lived long enough for her bones to show a change to a Norse diet, but they also tell a story of violence, healed nasal fractures, and teeth shattered in life. She was buried without grave goods. On the edge of the community, a concubine, perhaps, granted a grave, but not honor. Her story was one of thousands, a life of visible and invisible scars, where the weight of the loom felt as heavy as the shackles, and the greatest violence was the systematic erasure of the person she was meant to be. From the silent, snow-swept homesteads of Iceland to the bustling, sun-baked markets of Baghdad, the captive women of the Vikings became the invisible foundation upon which a vast network of trade and power was built. Their bodies were the currency of an empire. The Arab geographer Ibn Rusta, observing the Rus Vikings on the Volga River in the 10th century, noted with cold clarity that they treated their captives as one would treat cattle fattened for sale, dressed in fine garments they did not own, and paraded before buyers in ports from Constantinople to Baghdad. For a chieftain, a longship heavy with enslaved women was as valuable as one laden with silver. This was a global economy fueled by human sorrow. The journey for a Slavic or Irish woman could span continents. Seized from her village, marched to a river, loaded onto a ship, and sold in a Scandinavian port like Hedeby. She might then be transported again, down the Russian river roads to the Black Sea, and finally displayed on a wooden stage in the Byzantine capital. Her price was counted in dirhams, and her life was now defined by a value set by strangers. The Byzantine archives, all steel and bureaucracy, reduced them to transactions. 3 maidens purchased by Andreas. Yet, in a cruel and profound irony, these women, intended as tools for cultural erasure, became unlikely conduits for its survival. Even in their silence, they smuggled fragments of their homeland into the heart of Norse society. Archaeology uncovers these subtle acts of resistance. In Iceland, combs carved in a distinct Slavic style, are found in Norse farmsteads. The melodic lullabies of Ireland or the rhythmic folk tales of the Baltic shores were hummed softly in firelit longhouses, their foreign tunes seeping into the ears of children who would never know their mother's homeland. These children, born of coercion, are the complex legacy of this system. The Icelandic Landnámabók, the Book of Settlements, casually lists the founders of the island's great dynasties, often noting a founder's mother as a woman from the Hebrides or a thrall from Ireland. She is nameless, a geographic footnote, but her genetic and cultural imprint is foundational. The entire population history of Iceland is defined by this pattern. Norse male chromosomes, coupled with Celtic and Slavic mitochondrial DNA. The conquerors sought to use these women's wombs to build their own world, but in doing so, they created a society that carried the indelible, silent mark of the conquered. The very bloodlines they sought to control became a living archive of the lives they had tried to erase. The Norse sagas, those epic tales of heroes and gods, are curiously quiet. They glorify the daring raids, the gleaming swords, the voyages of discovery, but they largely omit the suffering that made it all possible. The countless women who are the foundation of this world are relegated to footnotes. A woman from the West, taken and freed after many years. This was not an accidental omission. It was a deliberate silence, an attempt to weave a tapestry of glory that carefully snipped out the threads of shame. The storytellers knew that to remember was to admit that their civilization was built, in part, upon a foundation of broken bodies and stolen lives. But history has a way of refusing silence. The earth itself has become the witness that the parchment refused to be. While the sagas spin their tales of valor, archaeology unearths a different truth. It finds the bones of a young woman in Orkney, her wrists scarred by shackles, her teeth shattered. It lifts from the soil the iron collar from Sweden, its lock still clicking with a sound that echoes across a millennium. DNA analysis reads the genetic code of modern populations and confesses the massive, forced migration of women from the British Isles to Scandinavia. The ground remembers what the poets tried to forget. This is the final, chilling truth of the Viking Age. The raiders thought they were immortalizing themselves through their deeds, their silver, and their stories. Instead, they have been immortalized through the very suffering they inflicted. Their most enduring legacy is not just the routes they sailed, but the unquiet echoes of those they enslaved. We romanticize the adventurers, but history forces us to confront the cost. So, let the camera of history pan back one last time to that Icelandic farmstead. The fire crackles. The children, with their Norse names and Scandinavian features, sleep soundly. And the woman at the hearth, her hands rough from a lifetime of labor not her own, hums a low, haunting melody. It is a lullaby from a land she will never see again, a fragment of a soul she refused to surrender. She will die in that foreign house, her name lost, but her song, like the story of her suffering, was smuggled into the future. It is there, in the genetic memory of millions, in the artifacts that refuse to stay buried, in the silence that somehow screams louder than any saga. We are left to listen hard to hear the truths the skalds refuse to sing, to remember that conquest is written not only in king lists and battle dates, but in the quiet, shattering stories of the vanquished, whose footsteps, though trampled by history, have left an indelible mark. The real hidden history of the Vikings is the unspeakable sorrow of conquered wives, a story written not in ink, but in scars, in silence, and in lullabies whispered against the wind. History often hides the stories of those who dared to love against the rules. If you enjoyed this journey into the Victorian era, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. It helps keep these forgotten tales alive.